Continuing part 2, if you haven't seen part 1, link will be in the description. Richard Dawkins on the big questions. Is the Bible still relevant today? Natural World YouTube channel. This is an amazing show because Richard Dawkins and Francesca Stavrakopoulou are both on the same panel, which has never happened. And if you haven't read her book, God and Anatomy, I highly recommend it. She is an ancient Near Eastern Old Testament scholar who really does a fantastic job, I think, in this book of showing God's anthropomorphic depictions, that the God of the Bible had a body, was like the other gods around, from Egypt and Hittites and Mesopotamia and Greeks, and everyone saw their gods as gods with bodies. And the God of the Bible, Yahweh, is often depicted with the same language you would use to describe a human body, the same language other cultures use to describe their gods. So anyway, the question really is the Bible still relevant today? So we're continuing this reaction, and I can't wait to see what happens. So let's see how this goes.
It's fascinating that you have aimed so far the discussion at the Old Testament.
It's chronological, Stephen.
Well, yeah, I'm anxious that we should get on.
Right, well, let's
what is at heart,
I'm anxious we should get on. I bet.
the basis of the Christian faith.
The facts and the extraordinary things that Jesus said.
Well, I mean, let us start with the extraordinary things that Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, which certainly are part of the oral tradition, which was handed down from man and woman to man and woman as it went through before it was written down. There's, I think, some evidence that those actually were the words of Jesus. And at the very heart of the Christian faith, where we find inspiration and teaching which has inspired people down 2,000 years and changes people's lives, because at the heart of that is a moral code which has actually affected the whole structure of our societies and Western civilization.
By the way, many of these were already teachings that were being passed around by other people, other Jews, and Golden Rule and stuff's been around longer than that. But like, yeah, we could talk about the good stuff. Sure, we could talk about some good things, and I think we should highlight that. Because oftentimes as atheists, you know, it's easy for us to just poo-poo everything. No, sometimes, you know, broken clock is right twice a day, right?
And had its knock-on into other civilizations as well.
We're going to get on to the morality of it in a minute. Evidence for this, Francesca?
Evidence? What evidence? The only things we know that Jesus said are the things that he is supposed to have said in the New Testament text. I have to say, the Sermon on the Mount, it's a beautiful piece of theology. It's a lovely piece of what some people call social justice. But actually, you know, any Jewish rabbi of the period could have said the same thing. This is a Jewish message. It's not a particularly innovative Christian message. And there's also parallel.
The whole...
So you have the rabbi chiming in going, yeah, I agree. There's some overlaps. There's some agreement.
Community of theologians and academics who've looked at the historical Jesus, and there are many of them, as you know, from very radical traditions in many cases, have identified certain sayings of Jesus as more likely than not of being original sayings of Jesus. Okay, I can't prove anything about...
Dude, these people are getting pissed. These people are getting pissed. This guy's losing his mind right now. He's pissed. Yeah, more likely than not, some. But if you even look at the Sermon on the Mount, a lot of people are like, there's no way someone could have memorized that whole thing and wrote it down as if Jesus said all that for real. They think there may have been some, you know, wise stuff put into the mouth of Jesus by authors. Could there have been an early person who documented this material somehow, and there's very early on they had that? Maybe. But did it have to happen on a mount? And was it a specific sermon specifically? Like, you know, there's all sorts of like problems with literally accepting it as it is.
Christianity,
Stephen.
I just can't do it. But I do say...
He's pissed. He ain't even letting the host chime in.
There's a probability that those words, the words of Jesus, and the fact that they have gone through the ages and survived in that way and have got that element of ring of truth has inspired people over 2,000 years.
So Stephen, did he raise Lazarus from the dead? Did he turn the water into water? Another, if Jesus come now and had a DNA test, half his DNA would come from his mother. What would the reading for the other half be?
You see, I don't find that a very important question.
Yeah, I bet you don't, man. That's because probably Joseph, probably a Roman soldier. I mean, who knows where his father's side, comes in at.
The virgin birth is not something I find at the heart of my faith. I find the Sermon on the Mount at the heart of my faith. I find Jesus speaking about justice and poverty and the way in which he inspired people and led people, the way in which he died.
Sure, I agree. I mean, there's some good things, but there's also a lot of apocalypticism in the teachings of Jesus. You got to be very careful because some of the shit is like, forsake this world. This world's coming to an end soon anyway. God's going to usher in the kingdom, that kind of stuff.
Died and rose again. Those are the heart of my faith, not whether he was born of a virgin.
That he died and rose again is the heart of his faith.
Do you believe he was born of a virgin?
Adrian.
Yeah, I think what you're doing, Nicky, is you're privileging the literal sense. Now, if we ask the question, what is it to read the Bible? Prior to the Reformation, Christians would have gone about it differently. They would have looked for a literal sense. They would have looked for a moral sense. Yeah. They would have looked for some allegorical sense, as if this might have told them something about the transcendent. And lastly, they would have looked for the anagogical sense, which is what we may hope for. Yes. What is there about the future? Yes. Now, at the time of the Reformation, it is the literal sense that gets privileged. That's why there's 45% of people in America who think that Adam and Eve were real people. And that is a gross distortion that has happened in Christianity. And we need to get back to the question, what is it to read the Bible well? And it's certainly not reading the Bible well to assume that everything in it has a kind of glass literal face to it.
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, did Augustine, did the church fathers think Adam and Eve existed? I don't think they thought they didn't. Maybe Athanasius, someone like that who was doing allegorical interpretations of material. And there was an allegorizing of material that did take place. Don't get me wrong, but that wasn't the primary and only understanding that was out there. So, yeah, I mean, I guess if you're making the primary only literal, sure, there's more to it. But this is also a way of defending the living tradition today from the absurdities of thinking a virgin could really give birth. But the guy admitted that resurrection happened from the dead. I think that's absurd too. I don't think that happened.
Let me take. We're going to go into the moral message from the Bible in just a second. But let's just take some comments. Can I take you first? Yes. You look like you're vaguely qualified.
Sort of. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Professor Dawkins asked about why didn't Jesus just say, there it is, question.
Oh, God, because he was talking about the Old Testament, I think. Yes.
The whole point of the way that a lot of the Bible is written, both Old and New Testament, is that it is written in parables, it's written in stories, because that precisely does raise the fact that we are questioning people. And as anybody who's ever preached will know, if you just stand and give a literal message, you end up with law, you end up with stuff that people don't listen to. Whereas if you actually tell stories and put it into poetry, people's imagination is captured, people's emotions are captured, and that's why the Bible is so important and has such a privileged position.
I'll take you, and then I'll go to the other side. Go on. Morning.
Yes, just going about the Bible, if it's divinely inspired, there's going to be gaps, and Richard Dawkins, you keep mentioning morals, but the Bible is way bigger than just morals, and if half America believes that Adam and Eve was literal, so what? It's just a divinely inspired story.
You believe it is divinely inspired? Let me take this gentleman over here. Hello.
I'd just like to identify the underlying argument, which I think the panel has touched upon, is that actually there's two sides of the way in which you'd read the Bible. You've got the academic side and you've got the devotional side. And I think in terms of relevancy for the Bible, I would say because the Bible is still one of the best-selling books of all time, for those who are devotional to the Bible, it's still relevant. But academically, I think there has been a move away from
is this suspending rational judgment then, for the sake of suspending rational judgment? Is that the devotional or not?
No, I don't necessarily think. I just think for someone who's a devotional Christian, I mean, I'm a devotional Christian, but I also study it academically, and I think as a devotional Christian, I'm quite happy to believe what Jesus said because I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. But then, as an academic, I also understand that you need to be able to critique and understand the different viewpoints of the Bible. So I think the real argument here is that actually we've got a devotional and an academic argument.
Well, let's get on to the moral argument. I mean, you said this.
So look, I'd like to hear some more critical, skeptical guys, because every person, apart from Francesca and Richard so far, seem to be defending in some way, biblical stuff. And don't get me wrong, we can get into poetry. If you ask Francesca that, she'll say, yeah, poetry. But, she also doesn't have a dog in the fight. She's not like, oh, I must defend this book because this book is... Yeah, the book has been put on a higher priority. If you saw my first reaction, Richard Dawkins says that. He's like, look, they've treated this book above all the other books. That's because Christians have dominated, literally, coercively, if you will, and advanced and became the majority people in the world.
There's bigger stuff tomorrow, so I'll bring you in this next bit, okay? Because I want to kick off this is going to be, I think, the biggest section of our conversation this morning.
Okay.
The moral message from the Bible. And, of course, Richard, in your books, you've been pretty scathing about the God of the Old Testament. Let me just quote you, if I may. The most unpleasant character in all fiction. Misogynistic, homophobic, racist, genocidal, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic. And you go on. It's quite a list.
I should have thought that was beyond dispute, but I would come on to the New Testament. What about the God of the New Testament? Here we have a God who wanted to forgive mankind its sins, including, by the way, the sin of Adam, who he presumably knew perfectly well never existed. Nevertheless, he wanted to forgive mankind's sins. Why didn't he just forgive them? Why was it necessary to have a human sacrifice, to have his son tortured and executed in order that the sins of mankind should be absolved? Is that not the most disgusting idea you've ever heard?
Get him!
Why didn't he just forgive the sins? Why did he have to sacrifice a scapegoat?
I think
the most disgusting thing you've ever heard.
Professor Dawkins has a view of cheap grace. A real forgiveness comes from restitution, from cost, from sacrifice. It is not God sacrificing his son. It is his son who, in obedience to the divine will, living the divine will in a society that has gone wrong, that is corporately wrong, which is what original sin means, by the way.
So there can be no forgiveness without...
Let me just finish.
Yeah, you don't let others finish, bro. So how about shut up and allow him to cut you off like you did Francesca the whole damn time?
It is his obedience in the context of a corrupt society that leads to his death. That is his sacrifice, and it is that which restores what was broken between God and human beings.
So there can be no forgiveness without a death, is that
No,
right?
it's not. I'm not saying that. There can be no forgiveness without cost.
Good job, mister. You're so good at saying the words. Come on.
How can you applaud that? How can you applaud that?
Because it's true.
Well, not everyone applauded. Some people did, but some people applauded you.
Because there's multiplicity of voices, and that's fine.
And
Christina.
I don't think that what happened to Jesus was necessary from the divine's point of view, but perhaps it was necessary for what happened in the context at that time. And what we mustn't forget is that after the death came something that we believe is an unprecedented type of new life. Now, I can learn things about the universe from you. I can learn things about history from you. But one of the things that I find more in engaging with the Bible and the stories it has in there is about the whys of the universe.
What about the misogyny?
Why are we here? What is the meaning and purpose for our lives? And to me, what comes out very clearly in what Jesus taught and said.
Dude, the fact that they ignore the host so often and keep talking is a little bit shocking, to be honest.
And certainly the writings afterwards is the whole purpose is love. And I really think that we cannot get away from, and I know you cited that earlier story that was just that awful story from the Old Testament, but what the God I worship is a God of love.
And Richard, just to come back to you, what about the extraordinary things that Jesus said, that the Bishop Stephen was talking about earlier on? For example, love those who persecute.
Oh, that's wonderful, of course. I mean, whoever said them, whether it was Jesus or not, whether there was...
Why should it not be Jesus?
Well, I don't care if it was Jesus. It's a wonderful thing to have said.
I mean, why...
Jesus might have said, let him finish the sentence.
Jesus
Christ, thank you. Shut up, man.
Whoever said it, it was a wonderful thing to say, and of course you can cherry pick any document and find lovely things to say. But how do you decide what to cherry pick? You decide what to cherry pick on the basis of what you have decided is a good thing on other criteria. So we reject the horrific story of Lot and the angels and all the other horrific stories in the Old Testament and the mega horrific story, as I've just said, of the New Testament. And you pick on nice stories like the Sermon on the Mount. But the criterion by which you do your cherry picking is, of course, something that we all share, which is we are decent human beings. That's where we get it from.
But that's
so we reject those other aspects of the Bible which are frankly horrible.
But in the same way, if you listen to the songs that you listen to on the radio are those that speak to you and speak to your heart. In the same way, that's why you pick them, because they make sense and they speak to your heart and they move you. And that's why you cherry pick those particular ones.
Of course.
Also, I don't want a hygienic life.
Yeah.
I don't want a life full of things that are just nice and just clean. There's lots that's messy and lots that's difficult that is in the canon and was kept in the canon. And also the canon developed. So from a Jewish point of view, we continually developed how we see the Bible, so we continue to develop how we see God and how we see ourselves. So actually, I think there is truth in the messy, horrible stories as well.
That's right. Why? I don't think... You look frustrated.
I like finding all this crazy, ancient, wild shit. A lot of it mythic, of course. Maybe there's some historical stuff for some of it. I like finding some of that crazy stuff. But I say that to say... I also enjoy Game of Thrones and seeing some of the wild, crazy stuff there, or any other really cool, interesting show, and I learn a lot from them. But I also am not trying to defend them canonically as the truth or the one way, that kind of stuff. Nobody would care in a pluralistic kind of... Everyone can have their own views and believe what they want. No one's getting butthurt about you having a particular belief. When you're dogmatic and everyone should share your worldview because yours is true, they're going to go to hell and they're going to burn, and you're trying to dictate laws and make changes in society, yeah, we got a problem.
Well, why bother with the Bible at all, then? I mean, you've got your nice messages that you can pick up from all sorts of places.
Life's not about life messages.
It's such a reservoir and a treasure house, and reading through it, I'm sure you relate to an awful lot of some of the...
But what about the stuff St. Paul said, Christina, about women, for example? I'm cherry-picking again, aren't I?
To the right person.
Submit to your husband as the Lord. It's a shame for women to speak in church. And it is, again, if necessarily...
I have to tell you,
you have to filter the good stuff out, don't you?
No, you don't have to filter the good stuff out. What you have to say is, who was St. Paul? What was his overriding message? What did he want to do? And
so you have to ignore the freaking shit that Paul just said.
He wanted nothing and no one to get in the way of people to have an encounter with the living Christ.
But why can't women speak in church? Why are you ignoring what he just said?
Now, I love St. Paul. Those things he wrote, you have to do something that is called, in theological studies, hermeneutics. That is, what did the person who was writing then mean to the people he was writing for, and what would he be writing today?
Francesca,
what would his message be today?
This is proper historical study. Why did they write it?
I was going to say, you just made the point earlier that I do history and you do theology, but it seems to me, for you to support your own theology, you need history.
Of course, we need each other.
So why are we relying on a collection of texts that are thousands of years old from societies completely different from our own?
Because St. Paul is one of my favourite people, apart from the person of Jesus.
You wouldn't have been one of his by the sounds of things.
Pardon?
You wouldn't have been one of his favourite people by the sounds of things.
Absolutely. If St. Paul were...
No, not according if he wrote those words, right?
Today, speaking into our society, our culture, he would be completely different. And I'm sure he would
He'd want women bishops.
Absolutely, but that's the least of it.
Chris, would he want women bishops?
What he would want? What he would want?
He might. You know what? That's so funny how we project. Like, we want him to be for what we want. You know, Paul's like me. Paul believes what I believe, you know?
Is a restored relationship, joking aside about women bishops, which are between men and women, and he would want justice and he would want respect.
Dr. Les Henry,
what I think is really interesting about what's happened so far in the programme is, if we just take a step back and think about it, everything we're discussing is mediated through human beings. Yeah. We don't know how we got here. Science can't tell us how we got here. So the Christians will say it was by fiat through God. Scientists will say evolutionary processes, Big Bang, whatever. That's the one question we can never answer. But what I find very interesting is today is that you'll have one Christian will say something, another one will disagree, and then they agree, and then they move on. Then they disagree, and then they agree. And I find it interesting you use hermeneutics, and you spoke about St. Paul more or less justifying what he did. Because the ends justifies the means. I think that's the bit you left out, but that was sort of where you were going. Mm-hmm. Now, I find it interesting that in the introduction to this program, you can talk about Christianity used to free slaves. It was also used to enslave people like me. Absolutely. Hence William Henry. Absolutely. It's not an African name. I'm an African person.
It was used to justify slavery as much as to free slaves, yeah.
It wasn't just used to justify.
God, this is so good what he's doing right now. I'm so glad this guy's saying this.
Also used to control and enslave people. It was also used to control and enslave people all over the place, not just in Africa. And for me, what I find very disturbing about these kind of conversations, and cherry picking is a very good word for me, is with many Orthodox Christians, they love to just use whatever justifies that point of the argument. But if you do point out the more unsavory aspects of what is in that book, all of a sudden you cannot even dispute that, which is why I believe it was suggested that it has this privileged position. And why does the Bible have that?
Yep.
I always, one of the things what I always say to people is, knowledge gives you the power to liberate or enslave. The Bible was used by the same Africans who were enslaved by it to liberate themselves. So why can't we look at it as a document that contains some truth, but is not the absolute truth, because it's mediated through human beings?
Okay, I like this. It gets that ultimate bullshit and breaks it down. Even though, why not bring other texts? Why not read other ancient materials? I mean, they have so much material out there that we could be reading and learning too. But we privilege one book. I'd say let's privilege more books. Let's learn a lot more about the ancient world and modern stuff too. And by the way, I think if we did that, we'd have less Richard Dawkins, really antagonistic against these kinds of things, but humans abuse and literally die on the hill about these particular faith questions.
It is used by Africans and other people as well still to oppress homosexuals, because they take that inference from
Nicky,
it.
this is the point that I'm making. You can, because if you give certain status to a book, you can dip into it and find a chapter or a passage or something that will justify any kind of inhuman treatment to any member of the human family, because that humanistic sense is suspended. Why? Because you're using your authority to say, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But the real question is, when somebody says, why shouldn't I do that? God says so. Suppose I don't believe in God.
The Bible is not ultimate in the Christian faith. It's Christ who is ultimate in Christian faith.
Exactly. We don't worship the Bible.
Dude, my God, this is crazy.
Exactly, we don't worship the Bible.
Is there an argument for ditching the Old Testament then?
No, there's not, because through the Old Testament we...
I know, Laura, you're not going to support that.
I'm also don't call it the Old Testament.
Look, she's a rabbi. She said, don't call it the Old Testament.
Is that politically incorrect? I'm sorry.
Yes.
In your terms, it was religiously incorrect.
Give me a chance. I would have said that the same thing. Yes, I would not call it the Old Testament. What I do want to say is that a name for Jesus in the Second Testament is the Word. Jesus Christ is God the Word. That's the revelation of God. It is the Word made flesh. Now, what the Bible is, it's the Word made text. Now, this constant conflation of the revelation of God in Christ with the book about all that.
I wish there were more skeptics in this panel. I'm not going to lie, like a little more pushback, because there's a lot of apologetics going on and trying to defend the Bible, and I'd like a little more pushback,
Inevitably raises the Bible to an ultimacy on which it cannot deliver.
Yeah. That's because we only know Jesus from what's written about
well,
him in the Gospels.
I know that.
So we have to read the Bible to understand who Jesus is. And
really?
we need the Old Testament in order to make sense of Jesus' claims about himself.
But I'm not denying any of that.
That's the only reason.
What about the other positive aspect of it? And Melvin Bragg, if I come back to Richard, and you can all comment on this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, Bishop Michael. Melvin Bragg was arguing this position recently, that some of the great civil rights movements, well, Martin Luther King's speech was so wonderfully biblical in essence and in delivery, and also overthrowing King Charles as well, the Puritans. Many of the progressive movements and much of the progressive politics has found its seedbed in the Bible.
Melvin Bragg makes excellent points along those lines, and it's perfectly true, of course, that much of the rhetoric of the political movements that one would wish to support comes from the Bible, because the Bible is the source of so much of our imagery, so much of our metaphors, so much of our literature. That's not at all surprising. You can find good quotations in the Bible to support the point of view that you want to adopt, and of course you can find the exact opposite. So why not bypass the Bible altogether as a source of authority, and simply say, as Shakespeare said, as Milton said, as anybody you like, you quote anybody in literature you like, and as Isaiah said, or as Jesus said, you can get quotations from literature all over the place to bolster the point of view that you want to make. That's what Martin Luther King did, and many other people have done from the Bible. You can get it from Shakespeare, you can get it from Milton, as I say, you can get it from Aldous Huxley, you can get it from all sorts of people, Dickens. The Bible should not be given the privileged status. We shouldn't be discussing here, is the Bible relevant today? We should be discussing, is literature generally relevant? Absolutely.
Yes, I think literature is relevant, but I'm afraid Professor Dawkins thinks that it is just of aesthetic relevance, whereas in fact literature has moral and spiritual relevance.
Christopher Hitchens makes the point.
Let me finish.
Just make this important, because he says there's as much truth as there is in the Bible as there is in Tolstoy and Shakespeare.
But where did Tolstoy get his truth from? I mean, Tolstoy, where did he... But the point, I think the central question that I think Professor Dawkins has actually asked is, why should the Bible or the Judeo-Christian tradition have preeminence? And the reason for it is that the moral criterion by which we have become decent people has come from the Bible.
Oh my God. No. No. Because from the Bible we got genocide, we got all sorts of, I can list them off. No. And there are times in which it's actually commanded by God to do those things. Sorry. Hate your mother, brother, sister, father. Come follow me. Oh, well, hate doesn't mean hate there. Oh, okay, so what's it mean? Love less? You gotta love your family less and follow Christ. He's more important than family. That's a cult 101 tactic that any nutty cult starts and tells you to do. Look, there's so much BS in this too, because a lot of the ethics in the biblical text are already from Judaism and Greco-Roman, ancient Near Eastern. Humans have developed this stuff for a while now. It annoys me to no end to hear Christians act like we only got our moral code from the Bible and that's it. I'm not saying that there aren't things we didn't learn from the Bible, but that exclusive nature of we became good people because of the Bible. And then they want to act like, well, it's not the Bible we worship the Word, which is Christ. Dude, you guys are like dying on the hill for the Bible, but then you don't want to die on the hill for the Bible. What is it? Make up your minds. This is part 2 to my reaction to the, I like to call it the Richard Dawkins and Francesca Stavrakopoulou against believers kind of video. But that one gentleman talking about slavery, I think he might be like in the same boat as Richard and Francesca. And he may be a spiritual man for all we know, which is fine. But like he brought such good balance and observation. What do you think? I think that was the best part. My highlight was when he chimed in and really came saying it was used for slavery against my people, right? Powerful stuff. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Subscribe, hit that bell, and hit all. If you don't, when I drop a reaction, you won't get notified. So I hope that you'll be there, front row seat, popcorn in hand, reacting, joining the club here. I sincerely appreciate all of you. If you have social media, share this out there. Get some people that you know that are into this kind of stuff to check it out and react with us. Like it. I hope like-minded people will join us. And of course, so be sure, if you will, drop a comment and suggest videos that you might want to watch. I sure hope to see you there. And until next time, See you then.